Hello, and welcome to this installment of the Future Grind podcast. I'm your host, Ryan O'Shea, and today I'll be speaking with the chairman of the US Transhumanist Party, Gennady Stolyarov II. Gennady took the reins of the Transhumanist Party when the organization's founder, Zoltan Istvan, stepped down after his campaign for president in 2016. In addition to his work with the party, Gennady is a published author and composer and has contributed articles to the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, the Brighter Brains Institute, the Mises Institute, and many more. We discuss the current state of transhumanist politics, why Gennady believes that they are important in the first place, and how he feels that transhumanism can transcend socialism, libertarianism, and all other conventional ideologies. As always, show notes and links are available at futuregrind.org. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, and wherever podcasts are found. A video version of this episode is posted on Facebook and YouTube. Make sure to subscribe on all of these platforms, leave a review, and you can also like, comment, and share to spread the word. If you'd like to keep this podcast running, you can donate at futuregrind.org/support. Because of you, this is Future Grind. And now we are here with Gennady. Gennady, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast.
So let's start this off with the question I'm sure you get asked most often. What is the US Transhumanist Party, and what is it that you advocate for?
The US Transhumanist Party is a young political party in the United States. We were founded on October 7th, 2014, so we will be celebrating our 4-year anniversary in just 2 days. We stand for putting science, health, and technology at the forefront of American politics. And instead of this incessant left-right partisan combat, we seek to move humanity into its next era. To do that, we advocate 3 core ideals. First, we support significant life extension achieved through the progress of science and technology. Second, we support a cultural, societal, and political atmosphere informed and animated by reason, science, and secular values. And third, we support efforts to use science, technology, and rational discourse to reduce and eliminate various existential risks to the human species. Now, there's a lot more specificity in what we stand for. We have a platform that was adopted via votes of our members who get to propose platform planks and then vote on them using electronic ranked preference balloting. So we had 6 platform votes over the course of 2017. And as a result of that, we adopted 82 platform planks. You can our platform on our website at transhumanist-party.org, and you will see that both the depth and breadth of our platform rivals the platforms of the Republican and Democratic parties. What we seek to do is put forth to the public ideas regarding how technology can be used to overcome the age-old and persistent problems of the human condition. Of course, the most significant problems are death and disease. Other significant problems include material scarcity, conflict, including warfare, but also lesser conflicts among humans, and cognitive biases that human beings are currently all unfortunately vulnerable to. We hope that using science and technology, as well as a rational approach to policy and problem solving, we can transcend all of those problems within our lifetimes.
Many people still associate the US Transhumanist Party with the party's founder, Zoltan Istvan, who I had as a guest on this podcast in 2016 when he was running for US president as the Transhumanist Party's endorsed candidate. How did you come to be the chairman of the Transhumanist Party, and what, if any, involvement does Zoltan still have with the organization?
So this is a very good question, and I think it's important to clarify the nature of Zoltan's involvement as well as when it changed significantly. So yes, you are correct. Zoltan was the founder. He ran for president. He had his famous Immortality bus campaign, which brought over 100 million page views to the Transhumanist Party's content. However, after the 2016 election ended, Zoltan stepped down from his role as chairman on November 17th, 2016, and he asked me to become the next chairman of the US Transhumanist Party. Prior to that, Zoltan essentially ran the Transhumanist Party single-handedly. He purchased the Immortality bus mostly out of his own resources. He outfitted it to be this coffin-shaped bus. It was originally a 1978 RV. He himself drove it throughout the country. He personally gave many interviews to journalists, and he essentially made the Transhumanist Party's image very much associated with himself as an individual. But he knew that this was not a permanent situation. It was not a sustainable situation for a political party. So what he asked me to do as chairman is, first of all, create more democratic governance structures within the Transhumanist Party. And second, enable a variety of perspectives to flourish within this broad umbrella of transhumanism. So we are not a left-wing political party. We are not a right-wing political party. We're not a libertarian or socialist political party. But we have members who may espouse any of those perspectives or none of those perspectives or some combination of them. And we still welcome them as long as they have some constructive ideas about how to improve the human condition. Zoltan himself is a journalist. He is an author. He wrote a book called The Transhumanist Wager in 2013, and he's great at garnering publicity. He's also great at making, let's say, very bold and sometimes controversial statements. I'm more of a technocratic administrator figure, and I also seek to make the ideas of transhumanism more palatable to the mainstream. So the kind of approach that has been observed from me and will continue is a more diplomatic approach. It is an approach that's less focused on, let's say, sensational assertions about what the future will be like or what transhumanism is about, and more focused on how do we get from here to there? How do we manage the transition? What sorts of policies can incrementally improve the human condition and get us into the next era? When Zoltan published The Transhumanist Wager, I reviewed it, and I wrote a thorough review with essentially mixed feedback. I compared The Transhumanist Wager to Ayn Rand's famous novel Atlas Shrugged, but in some respects, I even made the point that the characters in Atlas Shrugged would have been more restrained in how they responded to the world around them than the character of Jethro Knights in The Transhumanist Wager was. I'm not going to give any plot spoilers in this interview, but those who are interested in my thoughts will readily be able to find my review. And what was interesting to me was that when Zoltan read the review, his feedback to me was quite complimentary, even though part of my review was a critique. And that really favorably impressed me about Zoltan, because Zoltan is not the kind of person who expects complete agreement with him or his views. And sometimes he will make a statement or even a hypothetical characterization of the future just to provoke discussion and stimulate some controversy where different views are expressed. So in many ways, the transhumanist wager is open to interpretation. But the way I interpreted it was as a cautionary tale about the future, about essentially a world in which the reactionaries against transhumanism and the transhumanists could not find a way to peacefully resolve their differences through persuasion. And so essentially that world degenerated into a very destructive war. So my question in terms of politics and policy is, how can we from our present vantage point avoid that and have a completely peaceful, humane, inclusive transition into the next era? And I think Zoltan was very sympathetic to that. Later in 2013, I published my illustrated children's book, Death is Wrong, and Zoltan was one of its foremost advocates. He helped to publicize it. He wrote a review of it in Psychology Today, which then brought it to the attention of a lot of online news outlets. So essentially, Zoltan helped Death is Wrong achieve a level of exposure and perhaps a certain level of notoriety, though I think that's a reflection of the contemporary culture and the need to overcome certain death acceptance mindsets. But nonetheless, he and I have been essentially supporting one another's intellectual endeavors since that time, since we're both advocates for life extension, we're both advocates for a technological future. Then in late 2014, he founded the Transhumanist Party and he announced his candidacy for president. And I thought this was definitely an ambitious move. I myself have no aspirations to be a presidential candidate, but nonetheless, it would be, in my view, a useful educational tool to essentially achieve a level of public exposure that it's difficult for an academic intellectual to achieve. So I was sympathetic to Zoltan's endeavors, and he asked me to help his campaign by founding the Nevada Transhumanist Party, which I did in August of 2015. So I served as the chief executive of the Nevada Transhumanist Party. And again, I was favorably impressed with Zoltan's style of leadership. As the chairman of the US Transhumanist Party, he did not impose any conditions on how the Nevada Transhumanist Party was run. I had complete autonomy in doing that. And as you may be aware, in late 2015, there was some controversy within transhumanist circles about some of Zoltan's statements or some of the ways in which he conducted himself vis-a-vis whether or not governance of the Transhumanist Party was democratic. And I was in a position where I actually tried to reconcile the various sides of that controversy. So I think as a result of that, Zoltan thought that I would be a good figure to lead the Transhumanist Party after he stepped down, because I had developed a favorable reputation with a variety of prominent individuals in the Transhumanist Party, and I was able to be objective and recognize the merits of their perspectives. And I've tried to do that since then. So in essence, my approach has been to avoid conflict within transhumanism, because that conflict serves no purpose. Instead, I want as many transhumanists of as many different flavors as possible to collaborate in areas where they see collaboration as fruitful for the improvement of the human condition, for the formulation of policy proposals, and for outreach to the general public, because our challenge is external. It is to convince the remainder of society that the ideals of transhumanism are worth adopting, and that this is the philosophy that will essentially bring about a paradigm shift in the human condition.
So you mentioned your book, Death is Wrong there, and I'd definitely like to talk about that a bit later. But for now, there is no political party platform that I agree with more than that of the Transhumanist Party. I think it describes me almost perfectly. But I'm not a member of the Transhumanist Party, and that's partly because I don't want my speaking events and this podcast and the other things that I'm involved with to be seen as politically motivated. From my experiences, the involvement of politics leads people to ascribe selfish or biased motivation to activities that would otherwise be seen as benevolent or beneficial. For example, I could easily imagine a conference wanting a speaker on life extension, but intentionally avoiding someone associated with the Transhumanist Party because it could come across as advocating a political stance. Has this been something you or other members have faced at all?
Well, keep in mind that being a member of the Transhumanist Party is very similar, in essence, to being registered as a Republican or a Democrat or a Libertarian or a Green Party member, in the sense that if you're a registered member of one of those parties, that's not necessarily something that's broadcast all over. You don't even have to disclose it in another venue. If you go to, say, a club in your local community to give an educational presentation, you don't have to preface it by saying, oh, I'm a member of X political party. What's even more flexible about Transhumanist Party membership is that an individual can potentially be a member of another political party as well, because we are a young political party and because our membership application is entirely online. One can go to our website, register as a member of the US Transhumanist Party absolutely for free. Just go to transhumanist-party.org/membership, or go to transhumanist-party.org and click on our free membership link at the top of our homepage. And one can still be registered as a member of another political party with one's local electoral body in the jurisdiction where one resides. So I don't think there is necessarily going to be that stigma. Now, somebody could be a member of the Transhumanist Party and be proud of that and advertise that. That's certainly at the individual's discretion. But we respect our members' privacy. We don't disclose our membership list to anyone in the general public. We may disclose it internally among our officers, and if you vote in our elections, other members will see that you voted, but not how you voted. However, that's not going to be something that follows you around wherever you go. And I would say the way other people would view someone who is a registered Republican or Democrat or Libertarian opining on any other issue that's not necessarily political will most likely be the way somebody views a person who signed up to be a member of the Transhumanist Party, even if they know. It's not something that's going to be your number one identifying characteristic. I think your foremost identifying characteristics will always be what you do as an individual and the work you create day to day.
For anyone who's interested in joining the US Transhumanist Party, I will put links to that membership application in the show notes at futuregrind.org. One of the major problems that I see with the current US political system is that it has turned into essentially team sports. Many times, if a Democrat finds out that someone is a Republican, they immediately see them as the enemy, and vice versa. And I think this holds true for the smaller parties as well. So one of my concerns with transhumanist political parties is that anyone who aligns themselves with a different ideology will instantly see transhumanism as a competitor rather than a concept that they can adopt while still maintaining many of their existing political beliefs. Why do you feel that it's important to essentially compete against other political parties rather than forming an advocacy organization or a political action committee that can endorse and support any candidate that shares transhumanist goals?
Now, I'm not necessarily opposed to advocacy organizations or political action committees. In fact, there are several such existing organizations as well as proposals for such organizations, which I'm quite sympathetic to. But without a standalone political party, what all of those organizations are vulnerable to is being subsumed in the partisan struggle between left and right. And as a prime example of that, I offer the Futurist Party, which was a largely online political party that was essentially administered using the infrastructure of Reddit up until approximately 2015, when the Futurist Party voted to endorse the candidacy of Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders was seen as a kind of reformist, iconoclastic candidate who was offering policy alternatives to the Democratic establishment, which is, I think, why a lot of members of the Futurist Party were sympathetic to him. However, we know what happened then. Ultimately, Bernie Sanders endorsed Hillary Clinton, and his supporters fed into the Democratic political machine. And then Hillary Clinton went on to lose to Donald Trump, and that had a lot of implications for subsequent bitter partisan struggles. And it seems like a colossal waste for an idealistic party like the Futurist Party to have just de facto become a feeder organization into the Hillary Clinton campaign and the bitterness that ensued. So we need absolutely to avoid that. And we need to avoid a situation where partisanship becomes so bitter that transhumanists essentially fragment between the left and right political camps. This, in my view, has happened to libertarians already. So there are some libertarians whom now I would classify as Democrat-light. There are other libertarians who have become rather strongly Trumpist in their views. But both of those camps have lost the distinctive characteristics of libertarian ideas, the body of libertarian thought that really had centuries of precedent and was quite sophisticated and erudite. I do not see contemporary libertarians as exemplifying that intellectual legacy anymore, and that's unfortunate. Now, I've also welcomed a lot of libertarians into the Transhumanist Party, and when I speak with people who still identify as libertarians or who used to be libertarians, I mention that the Transhumanist Party is a home for all of those libertarians who still hold their ideas as more important than the partisan struggle and who were disillusioned by how the libertarian movement has evolved or devolved over the past several years. And in my view, the same can be said for other individuals who are more idea-oriented, who are not libertarians. For instance, former Bernie Sanders supporters who were disappointed at how the Democratic Party hierarchy essentially rigged the game against Bernie Sanders, and yet who want a party of principle where they can actually talk about policies that would achieve improvements to human well-being. I would welcome those individuals as well. I would welcome thoughtful conservative individuals who are disappointed in the populist direction in which Donald Trump has taken the Republican Party. And I would welcome individuals who would have identified as establishment, who think that this hyperpolarization, this erosion of civil discourse, this erosion of the norms of restraint that used to at least somewhat prevail in mainstream politics needs to be counteracted. So we can also be the party that holds itself to a higher standard of conduct, that doesn't engage in the same lowbrow tactics that we've seen recently from both the Democrats and the Republicans, and especially the advocacy groups and the PACs that feed into both of those parties. So what is really important about the Transhumanist Party is that it is a rallying point for all those who want an alternative. And we're not directly in combat with either the Democrats or the Republicans. We are essentially building while they are destroying. We are working on developing policy recommendations, and the more time passes, the more thorough those recommendations will be. We're happy to endorse candidates who are independent or nonpartisan, as long as they don't align with the Democrats or the Republicans or the minor parties who have fragmented in the way I described into right or left-leaning camps. So ultimately, we want to build the infrastructure for the future so that when people inevitably get tired of this hyper-partisan fray, there will be an alternative ready that is peaceful and humane. And the last point I will make is that in times like these, there's no guarantee that once the current warring factions exhaust themselves, what will step into the vacuum will be an improvement. Indeed, we have had many situations throughout history. One of them that comes to mind is Weimar Germany, where when that vacuum was created, a very reactionary, authoritarian, and violent type of alternative stepped in. So that is what we want to avoid. But in order to avoid that, we need to essentially prepare for years and perhaps decades in advance to ensure that when that window of opportunity arises, what moves into the vacuum is humane, civilized, peaceful, and forward-looking, and inclusive of all individuals who share a constructive vision of the future.
I think you made a lot of great points there, but I'd like to get into the weeds a bit on this, specifically regarding the terminology, if that's okay, because I think there are important distinctions to be made here. You are the Transhumanist Party, but what does the word party mean there? The Federal Election Commission, or FEC, has a definition of political party that doesn't seem to apply to your organization at this point. Is the Transhumanist Party any type of legal entity, and does it operate like most political parties we have in America?
So we do have some transhumanist parties either registered or in the process of registering at the state level. The Nevada Transhumanist Party, for instance, is an official minor political party registered with the Secretary of State. We do not have ballot access yet because to obtain ballot access, one must receive a certain number of petition signatures by hand. In Nevada, it's around 5,400, but it varies considerably by state, and different states have different thresholds for recognizing when a minor political party is officially formed. However, from the FEC's standpoint, there need to be several registered state-level political parties with ballot access before they consider recognizing a political party at the national level. And Zoltan actually tried to get recognition from the FEC, but he was essentially told, come back later once you have ballot access in several states and candidates already running in several states. So essentially at that point, the decision was, all right, let's pursue that over time. And when we're ready, let's apply again to the FEC. FEC registration really doesn't matter at this point because what the FEC oversees are campaigns and financing of campaigns. So as long as we're not paying any money or receiving any donations for a candidate to run for political office, we are outside of the FEC's jurisdiction. And it so happens that the US Transhumanist Party at present is an entirely non-monetary organization. So we accept no donations, we have no assets, no liabilities, no expenses. The way the Transhumanist Party operates is through its members. So individuals who are registered as members of the Transhumanist Party can use their own assets, their own time, and affiliate those activities with the Transhumanist Party on an entirely voluntary basis. They are able to use the logo of the Transhumanist Party. They are able to use all of the content that we generate on our website. They're able to contribute new content to us. So in a sense, it's an open source model. It's a model where people enable us to have the benefit of what they own and what they put into it, but they retain the ownership of all of the property that they use. And they also, when they make expenditures, they make those expenditures for themselves as individuals. When I travel to conferences, I pay for the airfare in my own name. I pay for the hotel fees in my own name. And likewise, anyone else who participates in our endeavors does that for themselves. So in essence, at present, we are volunteer driven. We are a truly grassroots organization. And the more we grow, the more volunteer input we hope to have. The more individuals we hope to have at the local level who can organize meetups or who can found state-level transhumanist parties where none currently exist, and file the official paperwork with the Secretary of State and their jurisdiction. If they want to get ballot access, they could organize the petition drives in order to do that. And eventually we'll be at that level where we could make an application to the FEC again, and then we will set up a more formal campaign infrastructure. In the meantime, though, there are still some options for running candidates. One of those options is called a political party designation. It's available in about half of the jurisdictions in the United States, where if an independent candidate qualifies for ballot access, that independent candidate may use a name, a political party designation, that doesn't have to be that of a registered political party in that state. So, for instance, in the state of New York, if someone qualifies for ballot access as an independent candidate, that person can put Transhumanist Party next to their name on the ballot. Another option, which is even easier, is an endorsement. Anybody can endorse a candidate. I, as an individual, can endorse a candidate, or an organization can endorse a candidate. So what we do currently with our candidates for the 2018 election cycle is that we hold an internal electronic vote where we put the question before our members, will you endorse candidate X who is running for a particular office? And if the members vote yes, we issue a statement endorsing that individual, and that individual can then say that he or she is a US Transhumanist Party endorsed candidate. So in many respects, what we are about at this stage is advocacy and helping to affect public opinion in directions away from this left-right partisan struggle and toward a longer-term orientation to explore how technology and policies related to technology can overcome the persistent problems of our time.
Another issue that you get into when dealing with politics are the legalities. You mentioned there that you have to deal with the FEC as well as state and local laws, and there are guidelines and required disclaimers for things like public communications. One aspect of the US Transhumanist Party that I imagine to be a bit controversial is the fact that you allow foreign nationals to join the party as allied members, which entitles them to participate in internal deliberations and voting. I know that the FEC has pretty strict regulations on this type of thing, and that foreign nationals are prohibited from participating in decisions concerning the administration or management of any political committee. Why was the decision made to allow foreign nationals to have a voice in questions of U.S. politics, and do you see this as having to change as the organization grows so that you can conform to existing laws?
So currently about 30% of our members are allied members, and essentially an allied member is anybody who is not eligible to vote in US elections. Now, those could be foreign nationals, those could also be children or teenagers. In the future, hypothetically, those could be sentient artificial general intelligences, or if there are any intelligent extraterrestrial beings, those could potentially be allied members. So it is a category intended to be maximally inclusive and intended to illustrate a key tenet of transhumanism, which is that we value the individual sapient mind, irrespective of its instantiation, whether it's biological or technological, irrespective of where that person was born, irrespective of that person's genetic heritage. So to artificially constrain the Transhumanist Party to only have members of a certain nationality or certain citizenship status would be, in effect, embracing the parochial or tribal mentalities of the era that we're trying to overcome. Transhumanism is truly an international movement, and the values we uphold, the types of projects we seek to instantiate, are universal across nations, across genders, skin colors, ethnic groups, religious groups, ages of individuals, and any other circumstantial attributes you can think of. So, in our view, the more open communication we have, the more input we have from individuals from other nations or other positions in life, the better our proposals are going to be. The more effective the solutions will be to the pressing issues of our day. So at present, at the very least, I would consider it essential to continue receiving input from our allied members. If at some future time we encounter a strict prohibition from doing that, we may consider how to respond to that from the standpoint of formality. But I think it's a futile effort to try to limit intellectual input. We all are influenced by ideas of people who were born or resided outside the United States. If you consider most of the great philosophers of history, they were not Americans. If you consider even the political thinkers who influenced the American founders, by definition, those thinkers were not Americans. So where do you draw the line? And how is it really possible to say that a political party can be free of foreign influence? I think that's a very difficult proposition to sustain in practice. So in the future, from the standpoint of formality, I think there will be a way to address that if necessary, and it may not even become necessary at the hypothetical stage at which we would become subject to the FEC's jurisdiction. But at the present time, I see this simply as communication and collaboration with people from other countries, and we call them allied members, but really they're individuals who are providing input, and that input is taken into consideration according to the same criteria as input from individuals who are eligible to vote in the United States. And I think any organization is able to do that and able to not be exclusive to individuals who may vote in the US.
I completely agree with you there, and I think that's great reasoning behind that. I just hope that the laws in society can keep up with that and it won't become an issue for the Transhumanist Party. Another thing, the Transhumanist Party website lists the Transhuman National Committee as an allied organization and describes the Transhuman National Committee as a PAC focused on transhumanism in politics in the United States with a long-term goal of creating a political party. What is your relationship with the TNC? Are they seeking to create a transhumanist political party that would be in competition with your own?
That's a good question. Now, the TNC was originally formed in 2015 by individuals who were seeking an alternative political approach to the one offered by Zoltan at the time. So the TNC has been a distinct organization from the US Transhumanist Party. One other aspect of US electoral law that it's important to keep in mind is that a party and a PAC may not be the same organization. So essentially, in expressing an ambition to form a PAC, the TNC has to remain separate and distinct from the US Transhumanist Party. Now, since I became the chairman, there has been far more amicable interaction between the US Transhumanist Party and the TNC. The TNC has not yet formally established a PAC, so at present I would see it as an embryonic, policy-oriented organization. It has its own platform that borrows certain elements from the Transhumanist Party platform, and previously the US Transhumanist Party also put up several plank wordings from the TNC platform up for a vote of our members. So there are definitely some overlaps. Mostly at present, the TNC maintains a Facebook group where transhumanists of various affiliations share information and discuss political issues. So mostly I see it as a forum where transhumanists can come together, share items of relevance, and discuss how to advance transhumanist politics more generally. It is correct that the TNC has an ambition also to eventually form a political party. I'm not sure in what manner this would coexist with any PAC that the TNC would legally form. I have suggested to the TNC leadership that perhaps the way to move forward in terms of this endeavor would be for the Transhumanist Party to be that political party and for the TNC to become the PAC and operate autonomously from the Transhumanist Party, but pursuing many of the same policy objectives. So it remains to be seen how the TNC will unfold. I think one difference is that the TNC will most likely accept monetary donations and external infusions of funding in the future. So the TNC may potentially be engaged in professional lobbying activities, whereas the US Transhumanist Party will be focused on volunteer activities. The two of those can complement one another in terms of their broader impact on the US political scene. I will say I wish the TNC well, and I'm interested in seeing how they develop further, and if anything changes about their ambitions and aspirations, I would be open to considering that and considering other ways to cooperate.
There's also a separate organization known as the Transhuman Party, which has already endorsed Democrat Andrew Yang, who is running on a platform of universal basic income in the 2020 presidential election. How does your Transhumanist Party differ from the Transhuman Party?
So the Transhuman Party was founded by Hank Pelletier, who was formerly the secretary of the Transhumanist Party when Zoltan was chairman, but Hank did not appreciate a statement that Zoltan made to a journalist that Zoltan might step down from his campaign and eventually endorse Hillary Clinton. Hank was not a supporter of Hillary Clinton, and he was also upset at not being consulted by Zoltan. So at that point, Hank essentially initiated this reaction within the transhumanist community to Zoltan's leadership. After the chairmanship of the US Transhumanist Party passed to me, Hank was more accepting of my role and my efforts to make the governance of the US Transhumanist Party more democratic and more oriented on the members' decision-making faculties. But Hank also continued to have an issue with Zoltan holding a trademark to the name Transhumanist Party. Now, primarily that trademark exists in a defensive capacity to prevent other individuals who are not affiliated with the US Transhumanist Party from claiming that they are the Transhumanist Party. And there may be a few non-representative segments of either transhumanists or even pseudo-transhumanists who would wish to do that. So anybody may use the trademark Transhumanist Party as long as they do so within the structures that have been established for the US Transhumanist Party. But Hank was not satisfied with that because he did not think that any single individual should be holding the trademark for a political party name. So the reason why he formed the Transhuman Party was to have a trademark that is shared among 25 individuals. And the Transhuman Party only has 25 members as a result, because Hank's view is that every member should be a partial owner of the trademark. From a legal standpoint, that becomes very logistically challenging. So this is why Hank has told me, essentially, the Transhuman Party will stay limited to its 25 members, but in terms of large-scale growth and having a voluminous constituency of members, the US Transhumanist Party is it. So what has happened in practice is the Transhuman Party has generated certain interesting ideas, certain articles on its website, sometimes certain critiques of the US Transhumanist Party, and we do look at what they produce, take it into consideration. If it's something constructive or something we can incorporate into our own platform or our own messaging, we will happily do that. They are their own organization, and they did endorse Andrew Yang, as you pointed out. Now, in my view, the US Transhumanist Party is unable to endorse Andrew Yang for several reasons. The main one is that he is running as a Democrat, and endorsing him would risk the same outcome as transpired with the Futurist Party when it endorsed Bernie Sanders. If Andrew Yang were hypothetically to become an independent candidate, let's say the Democrats nominate someone else, but Mr. Yang still wishes to run for president in 2020, all of a sudden, hypothetically, an endorsement through a vote of the US Transhumanist Party members would at least become conceivable. Now, in terms of comparing and contrasting Mr. Yang's platform to that of the US Transhumanist Party, there are some similarities, for instance, advocacy of universal basic income, but there are some significant differences in messaging and emphasis as well. Mr. Yang's famous tagline is putting humanity first, and in some ways he seeks to create policies in reaction to emerging trends of automation, such as a tax on businesses that utilize automated production systems in place of human workers, or a so-called value-added tax, which the US Transhumanist Party opposes in full. And furthermore, the US Transhumanist Party has a much more positive outlook on automation and the possibilities of leisure that it would open up to humans as a result of creating a world of radical abundance where eventually people will not need to have paid employment in order to survive. So I would say the US Transhumanist Party is more techno-optimistic. We're also focused on a broader array of emerging technologies. We are definitely the party that most staunchly advocates for life extension and continued research into medicine and nanotechnology. We have a much more positive view of artificial intelligence than Mr. Yang would. And we advocate for a lot of other policy reforms for a more transparent and accountable government at all levels that Mr. Yang may at times agree with, but doesn't really emphasize in his platform. So for this reason, the Transhuman Party is, of course, free to do what it wishes and what its members agree to. But at this time, our outlooks on the candidacy of Andrew Yang will differ substantially.
So you recently gave a talk titled How Transhumanism Can Transcend Socialism, Libertarianism, and Other Conventional Ideologies, and this was one that I greatly enjoyed. I agree, and I know many techno-progressives and anarcho-transhumanists that would agree on almost nothing except for their shared belief that we can and should use science and technology to transcend human limitations. And I particularly liked that you provided examples of messaging catered to adherents to these ideologies, showing not only how transhumanism can help them achieve their goals, but also how some aspects of their ideology might be holding them back. But this made me wonder, where do you personally fall on the political spectrum?
Well, that's an interesting question, because right now my answer would be that I am a transhumanist, in the sense that I do personally seek to transcend all of these historical ideologies. Now, at various times in the past, I identified as an objectivist. I would have said I'm an objectivist in the broad sense, but not in the narrow sense of hewing to every word that Ayn Rand ever wrote. I would have also identified as a libertarian, which many objectivists do not identify as, but more of a small L libertarian rather than a large L libertarian. And in many respects, when the electoral campaigns of 2015 and 2016 emerged onto the scene, that challenged a lot of my conception, not only in terms of what I thought, but in terms of what the political landscape actually looked like. Because observing the reactions of various individuals, including very thoughtful intellectuals whose work I had followed for years, to the emergence of Donald Trump and to the campaigns of Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, I realized that my understanding of where they were aligned and where perhaps a lot of their true motivations lay was starkly in contrast to the reality that actually revealed itself. So that led me to consider whether any ideology of the past really could accurately capture the moment that we were living in and explain all of the political tensions and alignments and realignments and flux of our era, or whether to genuinely understand it and to transcend the many negative aspects of contemporary politics, we needed a completely new framework of thinking. Now, that's not to say we need to reinvent the metaphorical wheel on everything. In fact, I'm a strong advocate of essentially adapting the best in every framework of thought to trying to solve the problems of our day. In that sense, you might even call me a pragmatist of sorts, in the sense that I see ideological systems as part of a toolkit that can be deployed where appropriate in order to improve human well-being. But ultimately, I would say a central aspect of my worldview is an attempt to transcend ideological and political tribalism, the attempt to rise above the tendency that has unfortunately subsumed many promising systems of thought to essentially just become a small, tight-knit group of people with a very conventional top-down leadership hierarchy where really the personal motives and benefit of the leaders become favored over the true principles that people of that worldview are supposed to be in favor of. So the big challenge of our era is to create a movement that really cannot be described as tribal in any sense. This is especially challenging because, according to some of the most thoughtful characterizations I've read, contemporary politics is fragmented into what can be called mimetic tribes, essentially smaller ideological groupings, each with their own idiosyncratic vocabulary, their own very specific objectives, their own defined nemeses and ideas of what counts as success. And unfortunately, there's a lot of internecine combat among those tribes, which is really quite counterproductive. So in my worldview, I really try to look at aspects that are more fundamental than ideology. Obviously, life itself, the length of life, the quality of life, material prosperity, the rate of advancement, the rate of innovation, and, of course, aspects that make life enjoyable. So aesthetics, art, music, architecture. In some ways, I have a lot of sympathies with self-identified conservatives who want to preserve the great achievements of the past. But at the same time, I also value tolerance and inclusivity and a cosmopolitan outlook as opposed to a parochial outlook. It's difficult to find a single word to encapsulate this worldview other than transhumanist, although I also understand that there are many people who call themselves transhumanist who have, at the very least, different areas of emphasis, or in more conventional political alignments would consider themselves to be very different from my worldview.
I agree. I see that tribalism as one of the major problems in our society today, and this in-group, out-group thinking is really holding us back, and I'd love to see someone overcome that, and hopefully the Transhumanist Party is able to do that. And you are actually an endorsed candidate running for office yourself in an election that will be decided in about a month. I'd love to hear a bit more about this. What office are you running for, and what made you take that leap?
That's correct. I'm running for the Board of Trustees of the Indian Hills General Improvement District in northern Nevada. It is located in Douglas County, also on the southern end of Carson City. It's a semi-autonomous jurisdiction responsible for the maintenance of water systems, sewer systems, roads, and parks. And in essence, it is responsible for providing the key infrastructure to the residents of the neighborhood. But it is not a homeowners association. It doesn't micro-regulate people the way a homeowners association might. And generally speaking, its governance has been quite reasonable and focused on matters of basic health and safety. I am running as a nonpartisan candidate for the Board of Trustees, but a candidate who has been endorsed unanimously by a vote of the members of the US Transhumanist Party. And there are going to be 3 vacant board seats effective January 1st, 2019. There are 4 candidates running, including myself. I think I have a reasonable probability of winning. And my focus in terms of my candidacy is to use rational evaluative frameworks to use science and technology and a respect for the facts in order to improve the quality of life for the people in the neighborhood. So a lot of the questions of maintaining, say, water or sewer or road infrastructure are technical questions, and I would need to consider the input from the district staff, from the engineer, from the personnel who deal with these issues every day, and the benefit cost considerations involved in every proposal that is put forth before the board. There are also questions of how can the district most effectively accommodate much needed growth within the area, because we are dealing with a scarce supply of housing. We also have some promising new construction projects on the horizon, but in order to successfully accommodate an increase in housing and an increase in population, the infrastructure needs to grow accordingly. So one of my priorities will be how to make rational decisions to help facilitate that growth of infrastructure, which will in turn facilitate an increase in the supply of housing, which will take some of the pressure off the astronomically high prices in the housing market and help people live more affordable lives. So in many respects, this is an application of the ideas of transhumanism in a mainstream context. And I'll always be on the lookout for emerging technologies that can help the work of the district be done more economically and with superior results. At the same time, I hope in my conduct and in the manner in which I will consider the input of all residents to transcend partisan politics and make sure that residents know that no matter what their political beliefs may be, I am here to listen to their suggestions, and I am here to try to find common ground and solutions that benefit as many of the residents as possible. So hopefully that kind of message will appeal sufficiently to the voters in my district, of whom I would say there are about 2,000. The whole population of the district is around 5,400, that they would be willing to entrust me with a seat on the Board of Trustees. I am very much looking forward to October 17th, when I will have a formal opportunity to present some of my ideas at a meeting of the Board of Trustees where each of the candidates will have that opportunity. And that will also be recorded and then published on YouTube on the official channel of the General Improvement District. So I would encourage all listeners to be on the lookout for that video in just a few weeks.
Yeah, I definitely look forward to seeing that video myself, and I will post a link to it at futuregrind.org when it becomes available as well to make sure we get some eyeballs on that. And best of luck in your election there. That sounds like a great thing to be doing, and we definitely can't overlook these local positions when people want to make a difference in their communities. That's a great place to get started with politics. So I see we've blown past our hour that we had scheduled for this. Are you okay to take a few more questions, or do you have a hard out here?
I'd be happy to take a few more questions.
Great. So what is your background, and how did you find and become interested in transhumanism?
I would say I have been a transhumanist ever since I found out about human mortality. And my illustrated children's book, Death is Wrong, describes a lot of my personal history and essentially how, as a child, I kept asking my parents, well, what comes later? And then what? And then what? And when I received the answer that, and then people die, I was outraged, because how could it be that a person who committed no transgression, who didn't grievously harm or kill other humans, would deserve the death penalty? So in my view, death is the greatest injustice, and I never accepted the commonly posited rationalizations, be they religious or secular, for human mortality. So a lot of my life and work since that time has been focused on essentially putting myself into a position where I can make a substantive and unique contribution to the fight against death and decay. Now, in terms of my education, I have degrees in economics, mathematics, and German. I am an actuary by specialty. I have 10 professional insurance designations. In a lot of regards, I consider my career as essentially giving me the means to pursue my individual projects in my own time. And of course, one of those major projects is seeking to influence public opinion and garner more public acceptance for efforts that could lengthen human lifespans, improve human health, and improve quality of life. So in terms of my skill set, I have a strong mathematical background, but I also have an extensive history of writing, both fiction and nonfiction. And I hope to put this combination of technical and creative skill sets, as well as a very systematic mindset that is oriented towards solving problems, to use in order to elevate the transhumanist movement and organize it so as to achieve more effective outcomes.
So you mentioned your book there, Death is Wrong, which you published in 2013 as a children's book that makes the case that death is the enemy and should be fought with medicine, science, and technology. What made you want to write this book, and why did you feel compelled to select children as the target audience?
The reason why I wrote this book for children is that there are many resources on transhumanism and life extension for adults. In fact, it is a growing area of interest with a growing amount of great literature. But children very often do not have access to materials at their level that enable them to counter these commonly posited rationalizations for death that they're exposed to routinely. So virtually every child will hear either the religious story that, oh, there's an afterlife, so you don't have to worry about dying, or the various secular rationalizations like, oh, death is natural, or it's selfish to want to live indefinitely, or what about overpopulation, or what about boredom? So I wanted to equip children with an intellectual toolkit that gave them an alternative potential perspective. I don't want to indoctrinate anyone into any mindset, but I think it is worthwhile for children to be exposed to a variety of points of view. And without Death is Wrong, unfortunately, most children would only be exposed to what I would call the death acceptance point of view. And it takes a great degree of willpower and indeed stubbornness to resist that and to remain sufficiently receptive to the possibility of life extension that during one's later teenage years or early adulthood, one could finally find the scientific body of work on longevity or transhumanist philosophy as it has been articulated by such thinkers as FM 2030 or Max Moore or to a certain extent Ray Kurzweil. But an 8-year-old child would still not be able to understand, at least most children would not be able to understand the works of Max Moore or Ray Kurzweil. So they need a simpler, more readily digestible presentation that serves as a gateway and really opens up this broad field of potential intellectual exploration later on. This is the reason why at the end of Death is Wrong, I have a bit more of a technical appendix trying to give a brief introduction to Aubrey de Grey's SENS approach, the strategies for engineered negligible senescence, as well as a list of links for resources that kids who are really precocious and really interested in this subject matter could explore further. One other reason why I chose to orient this book toward children is that children have greater flexibility in choosing what they want to do with their lives. And I hope I can inspire enough children to become scientists, technologists, philosophers, advocates for life extension, or artists, performers, musicians who contribute to the cultural acceptance of life extension as well as technological progress more generally. So I see this as helping to cultivate the next generation of people who will hopefully join our movement and work alongside us in achieving greater human well-being on all fronts.
If anyone would like to pick up a copy of this book, I'll make sure to include a link to it as well in the show notes at futuregrind.org. And among the many things you do is you also serve as the editor-in-chief of your own online magazine, The Rational Argumentator. What is The Rational Argumentator, and what kind of content can people find there?
The Rational Argumentator has been published since 2002. It recently celebrated its 16th anniversary. It is a journal advocating for Western civilization and preserving the great scientific, aesthetic, cultural, and philosophical achievements of Western civilization, framed in a very broad and inclusive manner. We support the principles of reason, rights, and progress, and publish the work of authors, artists, composers who embody these values. And in many respects, the Rational Argumentator is a place for intellectual exploration. The content I publish there is often my own content, but also content from, over time, hundreds of other authors. I don't necessarily agree with every word that I publish, but I publish works that I consider to be intellectually stimulating and thought-provoking, essentially enabling people to pursue philosophical reasoning and self-improvement and engagement with great ideas. In many respects, I see the Rational Argumentator's goals in this day and age as providing an alternative to this culture of attention deficit that exists, where people are flooded with so much information that often they skim over what they see and they focus on one-liners or memes or these very cursory tweets that often lend themselves open to misinterpretation. The Rational Argumentator is more of a long-form publication. We don't set any limits on the length of our content or the depth of our content, and hopefully there will be enough people who are encouraged to spend a lot of time reading or viewing or listening to our materials or watching the videos that are embedded there, and just improving themselves in any area that they find fruitful. I very much hold to the ideal of the Renaissance man or the polymath or the autodidact, a person who essentially strives to find out as much as possible about reality in many disciplines and excel in many disciplines and build bridges and connections across them. We live in an age of hyper-specialization where a lot of people know a lot about very narrow subject areas. And a lot of that knowledge, unfortunately, is not fully tapped in terms of its applications, because while it is known by somebody, it is not known by the people who could really put it into practice for concrete improvements to human well-being. So one of the aims of the Rational Argumentator is essentially to serve as a forum and a resource for those who want to draw connections across disciplines and essentially create innovative combinations of existing bodies of knowledge, hopefully to some practical benefit.
Well, as anyone who listens to my podcast knows, I am also a fan of long-form content and getting into the details of things and hearing opposing thoughts and views. So that is definitely something that I am interested in, and I would suggest that anyone check that out as well. That is the Rational Argumentator. But let's get back to the Transhumanist Party to wrap things up here. What do you expect for the future? Looking to 2020 and beyond, what do you expect for the growth of the party, and what's the timeline for getting there?
Excellent question. So we continue to advocate for more individuals to join us as members. I see 10,000 members as a crucial goal for an organization to become self-perpetuating, in the sense that there would be enough talent in the organization that its survival would not be inextricably related to a single individual or a small group of individuals. So I want to get there as quickly as possible. I encourage anyone who is sympathetic to any of the points I articulated on this podcast to go to transhumanist-party.org/membership and fill out our completely free application form. It takes less than a minute. It doesn't conflict with any other organizational affiliations you may have. And even if you're not eligible to vote in the United States, as long as you can form a political opinion, you're welcome to join us and contribute to our deliberations. One key objective that I will endeavor for the Transhumanist Party to pursue in the coming months is the selection of a candidate for president for the 2020 elections. My hope is to hold a primary sometime in early 2019. And unlike the primaries of the major political parties, I would not favor a protracted process, and I would not favor a process where contenders are gradually eliminated, because that prevents individuals, in many cases, from choosing the candidate whom they're most aligned with. Instead, in the US Transhumanist Party, we are distinctive in pursuing the method of electronic ranked preference voting. So instead of just voting for one choice, any member will have the opportunity to rank order all of the candidates who put themselves forward. And then there's an instant runoff process. So the candidate who gets the fewest number one votes in the initial round will be eliminated. And then for everyone who designated that candidate as their number one preference, their number two preference will then be reassigned to the number one vote. And then on the basis of that, there is essentially another round. It doesn't require the members to vote again. We just retabulate the votes. And we do that for as many rounds as it takes for a given candidate to reach a majority of the reallocated votes. The advantage of this process is that it completely eliminates the incentives for strategic voting or voting for the so-called lesser evil just because one doesn't want a particular option to prevail. And that lesser evil type of approach always leads to a suboptimal outcome. So we want to encourage our members to vote according to their true preference set. Prior to that, we're going to have 1 or 2 months for the candidates to essentially put forth their case for why they should be the Transhumanist Party's 2020 presidential nominee. And then, based on the information that they put forth online or any in-person campaigning that they choose to do, the members will then indicate their preference. And around March or April 2019, we will hopefully have a candidate, and hopefully the entire Transhumanist Party's efforts will be devoted toward helping that candidate succeed in the 2020 campaign. My definition of success at this stage is not winning the presidency. I realize the two political parties the Republicans and the Democrats still dominate the electoral system in the United States. However, the goal is to have someone there challenging that two-party system and also spreading awareness of the ideas of transhumanism and life extension. Essentially, an educational campaign. Zoltan's campaign was also educational, but in a different way. Zoltan garnered a lot of attention for transhumanism through essentially efforts to get as much public attention as possible by means of sensational displays like the Immortality bus. I think the next transhumanist educational campaign needs to be more oriented toward enabling mainstream acceptability of transhumanism. So the candidate we select needs to be a learned, erudite, articulate individual who is capable of speaking to different constituencies, different sizes of audiences, who is able to relate to the issues and concerns that matter to a lot of constituencies in the United States, and show how the ideas of transhumanism can help resolve many of those concerns. This individual has yet to be determined, and I have no ambitions, by the way, to be a presidential candidate, and besides, I would not be constitutionally eligible in 2020. So I am looking for anyone who wishes to put themselves forward and who would be able to serve in that role as an erudite spokesperson for transhumanism in an educational campaign. As I'm sure you can appreciate, politics, especially politics that has a certain degree of, let's say, unusual appeal, can generate media coverage. And that media coverage can extend beyond what is available for, let's say, more academic endeavors or more issue-specific advocacy endeavors. If someone is running as a candidate for president, and this is an insight that Zoltan very much recognized and capitalized on, then that person is more likely to be noticed by individuals who might have overlooked, say, a think tank policy paper or a group that is focused only on, say, life extension or only on advocating for a certain path of development for artificial intelligence. So hopefully this will be an avenue for people to learn about those other advocacy efforts as well and become involved within the broader transhumanist movement.
I particularly love the idea of the ranked preference voting. I wish that was something we did in our elections in general, because I think it could get away from this two-party death grip that we have in our current political system that I think is very divisive and keeping things heading in a problematic direction. So I look forward to see who the US Transhumanist Party endorses for the 2020 election and look forward to seeing your party continue to grow in the future. Thank you again, Gennady, for coming on the show.
Thank you very much, Ryan. I think you asked some of the most thoughtful questions that I have ever encountered in any interview, and you have certainly done thorough research into the state of contemporary transhumanist politics. So it was a pleasure to discourse with you today.
Hey everyone, Ryan O'Shea again, and thanks for listening to my interview with Gennady. Remember to check out the show notes and more at futuregrind.org. Make sure to subscribe, and you can also like, comment, and share to spread the word. We also need your help to keep this podcast running. Make sure these interviews can continue by going to futuregrind.org/support. Till next time, this is Future Grind.